Hello everyone, today I'm going to be doing a book review on Jason Brennan's 2016 book, Against Democracy. In addition to the review, I'm also going to be giving several objections to the book. Now, for my returning viewers, you'll know that I usually don't give objections to books, I just review them. However, I'm hoping to add this sort of segment to my book reviews for the future, so I'm going to test it out with Brennan's Against Democracy. Now, as the title, very provocative title, Against Democracy suggests, Brennan is arguing that modern democracy is an immoral and inefficient governmental system, and that we would be both more moral and more efficient in terms of government if we adopted an epistocracy. Now, epistocracy, as he defines it, means, quote, "A political system is epistocratic to the extent it distributes political power in proportion to knowledge or competence as a matter of law or policy," end quote. So Brennan is arguing that we should distribute political influence, political power based upon knowledge. Now, I know for many people that off the bat might sound like an oligarchy. However, Brennan is not arguing for oligarchy, where the government is run by an elite few of very competent individuals, sort of like Plato's philosopher kings or something of that nature. Brennan is still very democratic in the sense that he still believes in a democratic system under presumably a constitutional republic in the United States. The only difference that Brennan is suggesting is that we in some way make it so that people who are more competent about politics and political philosophy and the relevant social sciences such as economics, political science, etc., relating to politics, that those people who are more informed have more of a say in government. So he offers several different forms of epistocracy that the United States could adopt, or any other modern democracy, one of which is a limited suffrage, where, in other words, we don't all naturally have one vote in a democracy. We have no vote, and you have to earn that vote through some sort of competency exam. And an alternative of limited suffrage, or in addition to limited suffrage, you could also have plural voting, or weighted voting is another alternate epistocracy alternative that you could have, which is essentially that we weigh people's votes based on their political knowledge. So if you know more about politics, your vote is worth more, or if you know very little, your vote is worth less, and possibly if you don't really know much, you don't get to vote at all. Now, this is obviously a very radical idea in today's political climate, and in today's political philosophy, etc. So Brennan, kudos for really reaching out there and going for something radical. But honestly, he argues it very, very well. And I picked up this book expecting to disagree with it entirely. I was really expecting sort of an oligarchical argument, but his arguments for epistocracy are very, not only relevant, very persuasive. And I was really blown away by this book. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. So let's see. There's some. Oh, so his three arguments, his three primary, or not arguments, but his three goals to prove in this book, which are premises for his conclusion that epistocracy is better than democracy, are as follows. First, that political participation is not valuable for most people. On the contrary, it does most of us little good, and instead tends to stultify and corrupt us. It turns us into civic enemies who have grounds to hate one another. Secondly, citizens don't have any basic right to vote or run for office. Political power, even the small amount of power contained in the right to vote, has to be justified. And thirdly, that democracy is not a uniquely or intrinsically just form of government. Unrestricted, equal, universal suffrage in which each citizen automatically is entitled to one vote is in many ways, on its face, morally objectionable. Now, he argues for all this primarily on what he refers to as the anti-authority tenet. And the anti-authority tenet is that when some citizens are morally unreasonable, ignorant, or incompetent about politics, this justifies not permitting them to exercise political authority over others. It justifies either forbidding them from holding power or reducing the power they have in order to protect innocent people from their incompetence. And then he goes on to say that epistocrats need not assert that experts should be bosses. Epistocrats need only suggest that incompetent or unreasonable people should not be imposed on others as bosses. And then the last point I wanted to make about his arguments was what he refers to as the competence principle. Now, the competence principle is, it is presumed to be unjust and to violate a citizen's rights to forcibly deprive a citizen of life, liberty, or property, or to significantly harm their life prospects as a result of decisions made by an incompetent deliberative body or decisions made in an incompetent way or in bad faith. Political decisions are presumed legitimate and authoritative only when produced by competent political bodies in a competent way and in good faith. And then he says, presumptively, just as defendants have a right not to be subject to incompetent jury trials, innocent people have a right not to be subject to incompetently made political decisions. So Brennan's book, like I said, very persuasive, and I just sort of gave you a very, very rough outline of his argument, but a majority of the book is really a counter-argument to the idea of the three premises that I mentioned, that democracy is intrinsically good, intrinsically just, that everyone should be equally allowed a right to vote, and also the idea, the very egalitarian Enlightenment idea that we're all not only rationally capable of taking part in civic and political life, but also that we do so, and we do so in a civilized manner. And he backs us up with social, scientific, empirical evidence, with thought experiments, and he just does a very, very, very persuasive, persuasive job at counter-arguing any possible objections to this. In fact, reading this book, surprisingly, and because it's a completely different part of philosophy, surprisingly reminded me in many ways of my reading of Descartes' First Meditations on Philosophy. Now, I know that might sound weird, but Descartes was attacking a very presumed or assumed idea that we can trust our senses, or at least in his first meditation he was. And he did so excellently, and it was just so neat and tidy, and it was almost impossible to counter-argue. And I think that Brennan does such an amazing job at just that. He's attacking an extremely obvious assumption that we have, and he's just unrelentlessly attacking every different corner that he might defend it. And it was just very entertaining, a very, very entertaining read, and very, very relevant to today's politics. I mean, just the other day, New Mexico joined one of 11 states which are putting their electoral votes into their popular vote decision for the presidential nomination, or presidential election, I should say. So, and I'm not sure what Brennan would say about that, but I'm assuming he would be against that. And another thing that's great about this book too, especially in the world of today's politics, is that it's a great political philosophy book that's bipartisan. In other words, it doesn't really matter where you fall upon the political spectrum. You could still either be for or against this idea of epistocracy. In fact, I think there are many people on the radical, or I shouldn't say radical, I should say the far right and the far left, who have studied politics in such a rigorous manner that they would agree with Brennan that sort of the middle moderates who don't maybe know so much about politics shouldn't really get a say. So it's bipartisan. Regardless of your political leanings, you can pick it up and really enjoy it. As I said, very well argued. I'm going to rate Jason Brennan's Against Democracy a solid 5 out of 5. Just excellent book. I couldn't put it down. I read it in about 3 days. Very good. Now, the two possible objections I wanted to make to it. I want to forward these possible objections by saying that I haven't done a ton of research into the philosophical and political science responses to Jason Brennan's book since 2016. It's been three years. So I don't know if these objections have already been made by somebody, some book critic or something. So if they have, I'm not trying to plagiarize. It's just a coincidence, I suppose. But anyway, so the two objections that I want to raise, possible objections to Jason Brennan's book, firstly is that one of his main arguments is that within a democracy, the individual vote is negligible. In other words, one vote doesn't really matter. And other than in the extremely rare case of a tie, your vote is basically doesn't matter. But under an epistocracy, that problem still remains, depending on how many people are informed and how large the population is. I mean, even if we say only 50%, let's say, of the US population, after we adopt an epistocracy, qualifies to vote under a limited suffrage, we'll say. Still, 50% of the American population is a boatload. I don't know the number, but it's a lot. And it seems that the individual vote, while twice as significant as before, is still basically negligible. And that will only increase as population increases and or as people become maybe more knowledgeable in order to vote, in order to qualify to vote. So I'm not sure if Brennan has a response to that or if he already has because someone else has already raised that objection. Nonetheless, so I think many of his arguments stand because the negligibility of the individual vote isn't his basic argument. It's just one of his side arguments. Now, my second objection is that Brennan sees democracy as valuable only as, he says, a hammer, as a tool to make efficient policies and efficient government. So it's instrumental, it's consequential. The symbolic parts of a democracy, the egalitarian parts aren't important. All that are important are whether or not it gets stuff done, if the trains run on time, as they say. But my objection would be this. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that you have two possible governments. One is a democracy and one is one version of an epistocracy. And for the sake of argument, let's say that both are equally instrumental, equally consequential. And then you survey, I don't know, a bunch of people in, let's say, a state of nature and ask which government they prefer. Now, if it's only consequential and instrumental variables, I guess, or that matter, then it should be about 50-50. 50 say they prefer democracy, 50 say they prefer epistocracy. However, I think it's pretty fair to assume that a majority, possibly a vast majority of those people surveyed would say that even though it's insignificant consequentially which government they choose, I think most would choose a democracy, and most would choose to have a say, however negligible that say may be. So, yeah, that's my second objection, is I think that it's not entirely consequential, because it seems that in the event that they're both equally efficient, we would still prefer the democracy. So there's something there that he quite hasn't gotten, he hasn't specified yet, that I can't specify, but there's something there. So anyways, Jason Brennan's Against Democracy, 5 out of 5. If you're into politics, regardless of where you fall on the spectrum, I highly suggest reading it. Thanks for watching.